Join me as we unlock the stories of the past, turning the pages of history to discover the vibrant lives, struggles, and triumphs that have shaped our world. The morning mist clings low across the fields like a sleeping dog curling through ruts in the path and wrapping your ankles in chill. A rooster crows before the sun dares peek over the treetops, and you, groggy sore and very much not ready, swing your legs off the straw-stuffed sack you call a bed. The air smells like damp wool smoke and turnip breath. Your little hut has no windows, only gaps between the wattle and daub that whistle in the breeze like a judgmental ghost. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere interesting, post your location and local time. I always love seeing where these sleepy stories drift. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The thatch roof sags slightly with age. You know every creak in the timbers above your head, every cold stone beneath your feet. The chickens have already woken up and are gossiping loudly in the corner. You pull a scratchy woolen tunic over your head, still faintly damp from yesterday's sweat, and stretch your aching arms. Sleep never quite erases the stiffness. Your body belongs to labor, and it reminds you daily. There's no clock, no alarm, just the rhythm of life tied to the sun. Your internal timekeeper says you've got about 10 minutes before the manor steward does his rounds and demands to know why you're not already at the fields. You glance over at your family still snoring in various corners of the one-room hut. Your spouse lies curled beside the hearth, while the littlest one is drooling peacefully onto a folded tunic. There's something comforting about the chaos. You are poor, yes, but so is everyone else here. Poverty isn't a shame, it's the wallpaper of your world. Outside, the ground is still wet from last night's rain, and your bare feet find every cold clump of earth as you step out to relieve yourself. In the shared latrine trench, a place of both necessity and nightly horrors. The village pigs were there recently. You hope they have moved on. You splash your face with cold water from a bucket by the door. Cleanish. Good enough. Hygiene is more about not dying than feeling fresh. You briefly scratch at the fleas in your hair. That's normal. Everyone has them. It's almost like a community badge. The manor bell clatters in the distance, a warped clang that sends birds scattering and tells you it's time to trudge to the fields. Your first job today is helping repair a fence that the sheep absolutely did not respect last night. You sigh. That fence will break again by Thursday, it always does. As you walk toward the manor's lands, you pass other villagers emerging from their huts, all dressed similarly in patched tunics wrapped in layers of practicality. Someone makes a dry joke about the weather, which earns a tired snort. Humor here is like bread, dark, hard, and slightly moldy, but oddly nourishing. A few of the children run barefoot, already chasing each other with sticks and shrieking with joy. They'll be hauling water by noon. Childhood here is more of a temporary condition than a protected stage. The lucky ones make it past 5 winters. The fields stretch wide and foggy before you divide it into strips like a giant green and brown quilt. Your lord owns it all. You work a strip of it for your own food, but you owe more labor called week work on his portion. Today is his day. They're all his days, really. As you lift the shovel and set to work alongside a few neighbors, the cold seeps into your fingers and your back already protests. One man sneezes into his sleeve, then keeps digging. You suspect he's got the fever that's been circling the village. No one talks about it. If it's your time, it's your time. There's comfort in the routine, though. Push, lift, turn the soil. Breathe. Push again. The rhythm is ancient, older than the manor itself. Older than any lord or law. This land has been dug, planted, harvested, and wept over for centuries. And still you can't shake the thought that the soil knows your name. You pause to look at your hands, calloused, blistered, brown with earth. These are not hands made for writing or painting. These are survival tools. You don't remember when they became so worn. You were probably a child. You became useful around age 7, maybe earlier. Childhoods blend into workdays quickly when you're a serf. You take a sip from the leather flask at your hip. It's just watered ale since the well water isn't always safe and beer even weak keeps you upright. Breakfast was a crust of rye bread and something that may have once been an onion. Maybe it's best not to question the flavors. Later in the morning, a steward rides by on horseback. His cloak is trimmed in fur and his boots don't have holes. You avoid his eyes. Serfs aren't supposed to be too familiar. He doesn't dismount, just nods vaguely as he inspects the rows. Behind him, a thin young scribe on a donkey scratches notes into a ledger. Your name is probably in there somewhere alongside how many eggs you owe this month. And no, you can't just leave. Serfdom is a sticky thing. You are bound to this land like ivy to a stone wall. You can be sold, inherited, traded, but walking away? That's desertion, punishable by law. Some try anyway, slipping into the forest and joining outlaw bands or dying quickly from exposure. Freedom, you've learned, is a relative term. Still, there are bright spots. The robin that hops near your foot unafraid. The warmth of sun on your back when the clouds finally break. A joke traded with a friend. A loaf shared when someone has a little extra. These things hold more value than coin here. A fringe theory, though probably not true, says some lords used to brand disobedient serfs like cattle. Most historians dismiss that as exaggerated rumor, though records from certain brutal estates hint at shockingly creative punishments. Historians still argue whether these were regional customs or isolated horrors. As the day stretches, so does your shadow, and the ache in your back becomes more familiar than your own thoughts. You pause again, wiping sweat from your brow with the sleeve so crusty it might actually stand up on its own. By sunset, you're back at the hut. Smoke rises lazily from hearths across the village, and the air smells faintly of charred barley and something suspiciously fishy. Your feet throb. Your stomach growls. You're too tired to be angry. Or maybe anger takes more calories than you can afford. You smile at your little one toddling toward you, arms outstretched. And somehow in all this gray there is color. You sit on a crooked stool by the hearth, easing your weight off aching feet and letting the heat from the smoldering coals lick your shins. It's not exactly comfortable, but comfort isn't something a medieval serf expects. What you have is familiarity, a kind of resigned companionship with your surroundings, like an old, slightly judgmental neighbor who smells of burnt leeks and disappointment. As your spouse ladles out the evening's pottage, thin turnipy and suspiciously light on actual vegetables, you remember something absurd. Even this bowl, this ladle, the pot on the fire, the wood in the hearth, none of it truly belongs to you. It's all technically the property of the lord of the manor. Yes, even your socks, if you had socks. It sounds like a joke, but under the law, the time customary or written, you are not just poor. You're unfree. The land is owned by the Lord, and you are of the land, which makes you, in legal terms, slightly more valuable than a sheep, but significantly less autonomous. It's called villenage, and it means that you and everything you touch is part of the estate's assets. You're not enslaved exactly, but you're not free either. It's a bit like living in a subscription model you never signed up for and definitely can't cancel. Earlier today, you were fixing a broken fence with tools borrowed from the manor. If the hammer breaks in your hand, the Lord could technically fine you for damaging his property. If your pig wanders too close to his orchard, you could be punished. If your child accidentally picks apples from the wrong tree, well, say goodbye to those apples and possibly the child's innocence regarding justice. There's a common phrase muttered among serfs when no reeve is in earshot: the Lord's smile is a tax and his silence is a debt. Tonight, while sharing the pottage, you listen to gossip. Someone claims a widow down the lane was fined 2 hens for remarrying without the Lord's permission. Another whispers that her new husband only offered a single chicken as the bride price and maybe the Lord was just insulted. Historians still argue whether these marital permissions were universally enforced or just used to exert petty control. Either way, the power imbalance is clear. Your personal choices must be filtered through the feudal hierarchy. Outside, a dog barks. Inside, your family listens as you recount the steward's inspection that morning. The kids giggle at your impression of the scribe's long nose even as they lick the last drops of stew from their wooden bowls. That bowl, carved from a felled tree without the Lord's approval, technically a crime. But no one enforces that unless you've done something worse, like speaking too loudly at church or owning more than one chicken without permission. Ownership, you've realized, is an illusion here. You have use of things, land, tools, clothing, but not possession, not in the legal sense. And while it sounds ridiculous now, this is the invisible thread running through every aspect of your life. Even your body is sort of leased. Let's say you want to leave the manor, move to another village, try your luck at a monastery or as a free laborer in a town. You'd need written permission, and even then the manor might track you down. In one particularly strange case, an escaped serf who became a respected town official was forcibly dragged back to his original lord 50 miles away. He pleaded literacy. The manor responded with shackles, but there are loopholes, clever ones. If you flee to a city and live there for a full year and a day without being caught, you might legally become free. That's a big if, though. Most lords have long memories and longer arms. And then there's the Harriet. Ah, yes, death's final insult. When a serf dies, the lord has the right to claim their best animal or possession as a death duty. That's right, your family mourns, buries you, and then watches your best ox get hauled away as a sort of goodbye tax. There's no rest for the indebted, even in the grave. Quirkily, some manors had very specific Harriet policies. On certain lands, a serf's second-best cloak was taken, not the best, because the reeve already owned the best one and didn't want competition. Others collected boots, tools, even wedding rings. There's a recorded case where a widow was fined for not handing over her husband's belt buckle. A serious matter, apparently. Must have been a great buckle. You scratch at your arm absent-mindedly, then remember that even your fleas probably owe rent. Despite all this, there are ways to navigate the system. Some lords are fair, or at least lazy. If you keep your head down, work your days, pay your dues, and don't start a rebellion, you'll probably be left alone. Mostly. Maybe. Except when they decide to host a feast and need your help baking 200 loaves of bread without extra pay. Occasionally, someone in the village will mention buying their freedom. It's possible if you save up enough coin which you never see or do something the Lord considers valuable. Like craft fine goods, make impressive wine, or provide an unusually strong ox. But even then, the paperwork is absurd, the process long, and the freedom conditional. More like an upgraded version of being less unfree. It's strange. You've lived this way your entire life. It doesn't feel unjust most days, it just is. The way trees grow upward and roosters shout at dawn. The way the land gives and takes some more. Still, when you lie back on your straw bedding tonight beside the hearth, the stew pot and your hand-me-down tunic, you find yourself imagining what it would be like to own something, truly own it. A plot of land no one could take. A home no steward could inspect. A choice, any choice that didn't need a nod from someone in a fur-lined robe. You close your eyes. In your dream, you're standing alone in a field you've plowed. The sun is yours. The soil is yours. The wind is free. And your socks, if you had them, belong to no one but you. By the time the cock crows again, you've already been up for an hour. You'd rather not be, but life as a medieval serf doesn't ask nicely. It insists. With the wet slap of your bare feet on cold earth, with the ache in your lower back that never quite vanishes, and with the dull realization that today, like most days, you'll be working for someone else, on land that isn't yours, growing food you won't get to eat, paying taxes with goods you don't really have. Today's job: weed the Lord's barley field, then haul bundles of firewood from the forest to the manor kitchens. You stretch your arms, sigh, and trudge out. The manor's steward, an officious man who always seems to smell like onions, and judgment has already posted the day's assignments on the church door. You're listed third right after old Haman, the one-eyed plowman, and before Agnes, who somehow still has all 10 fingers, despite being the village's most clumsy spinner. Weak work, it's called. Your obligation, your burden, your sentence, if you want to be dramatic. You owe 2 to 3 days a week laboring on the Lord's domain. That's his private land. The fertile good stuff. He keeps it for himself while you scrape a living from narrow strips of the less flattering soil. On top of that, you owe extra work during harvest special service, during feasts, random gifts like a goose at Christmas, and sometimes something called boon work, which isn't as fun as it sounds. In return, you get to not be whipped, mostly. You begin by weeding, which is exactly as thrilling as it sounds. Hands in the dirt, knees wet from dew, and your fingers frozen stiff around stubborn plants that never stop growing. It's like trying to clean a floor while the ceiling keeps crumbling. Every handful of weeds makes your stomach growl a little louder. Your breakfast was meager stale crust dipped in ale and chewed thoughtfully until your teeth stopped hurting. No one complains, though. There's not much point. Complaining is for people with options. Don't forget your tithe, someone mutters near you. Right on top of taxes to the Lord, there's the church's cut. 10%. In theory. In practice, you give what you can when you can and hope the priest has a forgiving nature. You might bring a basket of eggs or a bundle of thatch instead of silver coins. Most villagers couldn't even recognize a coin if you held it under their nose. The economy here doesn't jingle, it clucks. A chicken can settle a debt. So can a wheel of cheese or a sack of barley or even a half-day's work. It's all negotiable, flexible, and precarious. You've seen debts passed down like heirlooms, and you've watched a widow trade the family's only goat to avoid eviction. You still miss that goat. The taxes don't end with tithes or week work. You pay merchant marriage tax, chevage poll tax, tallage random tax the Lord invents when he's bored, and sometimes even Harriet death tax. If someone told you there was a blinking tax, you'd believe them. And yet, some serfs, the clever ones, make it work. One neighbor grows herbs and sneaks off at night to sell them in a nearby village. Another makes rough cider trading jars under the table. A few breed small dogs, lap-sized puffballs for minor nobles who fancy such things. These are the side hustles of the oppressed. Taxed, probably. Illegal, definitely. But they put food on the table and dreams in your head. You've tried similar tricks. Growing cabbages in a hidden corner of the forest. Carving spoons to trade for cloth. Once you considered catching fish in the manor's stream, but that comes with harsh penalties. There's a story of a man caught poaching trout who had his ear nailed to a post. No one mentions his name anymore. It's unlucky. Still, there's a rhythm to this life. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. It's exhausting, yes, but also stable, predictable, in a way that's comforting. There's a strange satisfaction in turning soil and knowing you've contributed to something tangible, even if it's someone else's granary you're filling. The barley field smells earthy and sweet as the sun climbs. You pause to stretch your back, squinting at the sky. It'll be a dry day. That's good. Rain ruins everything: the crops, the mood, the drying laundry. You mutter a little thanks to the Virgin just in case she's listening today. Later, you move on to firewood hauling. That's when you overhear something interesting. A messenger passed through the village last night. He was headed for the castle up north, but he stopped to water his horse and toss a few crumbs to the children. The reeve, nosy as ever, asked about the news. The messenger said taxes are going up. Again! A new war is being planned, and the crown needs coin. That means the lords will squeeze the tenants who will squeeze the serfs. You feel the knot in your stomach tighten. You have nothing left to give. What will they take next? Your tools? Your cloak? Your very breath? Historians still debate how often medieval serfs faced full starvation from taxation alone. Some argue it was rare. Others cite village records of entire hamlets disappearing from rolls during tough years. Maybe they fled. Maybe they died. Maybe they were simply erased by hunger. As you bend to lift another bundle of branches, you wonder if history will remember your name. Probably not. Serfs are anonymous in most records. Unless you commit a crime or marry someone particularly scandalous, your life exists in the margins. But that doesn't mean you don't matter. You matter to your family. To the old woman whose roof you helped thatch last spring. To the boy you taught how to sharpen a blade without slicing his thumb. You matter in the way a single stone supports the arch of a bridge. Not flashy, not decorative, but crucial. Night creeps in as you finish your last task. The firewood is stacked. The tools are returned. The steward barely glances your way. You limp back to your hut and peel off your damp tunic, trying not to wake the little ones. There's no supper tonight, just sleep. You lie down on the straw listening to the wind through the thatch. And before you drift off, you can't help but chuckle. You're taxed beyond sense, bound to the land and forbidden from fishing. And yet somehow you survived another day. Congratulations, you've beaten the odds. Morning light filters through the cracks in your wattle and daub walls, illuminating dust motes that dance lazily above your face. Your stomach grumbles in a low, familiar rhythm, one that says, "No, that wasn't a dream, you're still here and you're still hungry." Breakfast, such as it is, consists of a few crusts of coarse black bread dipped in ale or water if you're lucky. The bread is hard, dense, and baked with flour that might contain more groundweed seeds than actual grain. There's a crunch that could be barley or gravel. You chew anyway. Food in your world is fuel. First pleasure never. Unless it's a feast day, or someone dies and the wake comes with shared cider and stolen sausages. But most days are turnips. You eat what you grow if you're allowed to keep it. Cabbages, onions, leeks, and legumes. Pea pottage is the staple. Not glamorous, but it fills the belly. Some days you spice it up with garlic or herbs if you're feeling rebellious. On bold days, someone tosses in an old ham bone just to make the pot smell like meat. Meat itself rare. A luxury. If you don't raise it, poach it, or get married into a pig, you won't taste it often. You'd love a sausage. Everyone would. But pigs require feed shelter and, most importantly, permission. If the Lord claims it as his right, your plumpest piglet becomes someone else's dinner. And if you're caught hunting or trapping without license, well, there's always the stocks, or the gallows, depending on the mood of the reeve. Still, some take the risk. After all, the deer in the Lord's forest look awfully plump. There are stories about men sneaking out under moonlight, their faces blackened, with soot bows slung across their backs. Some return triumphant with hare or bird, others vanish. One legend says a man was caught with a snared pheasant and forced to eat it whole bones and all in front of the court. Historians still argue whether that tale was moral instruction or a culinary horror story. Your own wild game experience. A mouse once. It didn't taste like much, but it was warm. You glance over at the family's tiny food stores, a cloth bag of dried beans, some salted cabbage, and 2 eggs that might become tomorrow's meal if the chickens are feeling generous. You've seen fancier meals in the dog bowls at the manor. There's a stale wheel of cheese on the shelf. Emphasis on stale. It smells like regret and hope. You chip off a piece and scrape off the blue bits. Cheese, despite appearances, is prized. It lasts, fills the stomach, and is somehow both food and trade. A chunk of cheddar might get you a borrowed tool, a mended boot, or forgiveness from a grumpy neighbor. And then there's ale. You drink it not for fun, but because it's safer than water. Everyone does, even the children. Yours had their first sips before they could walk. It's weak, barely fermented, but better than a belly full of dysentery. The stronger stuff is saved for feast days and funerals, sometimes both. Speaking of children, your eldest is already pestering you for more bread. You pass him a crust and tousle his hair? He's thin but sharp, always listening, always watching. Maybe he'll be the one to leave this village someday. Or maybe not. You've thought that same thing about yourself once long ago. Lunch is a mystery. You might dig up some carrots, mash them with beans, and call it stew. You've done worse. You once ate boiled nettles and declared it spicy salad. The village still talks about that joke. But tonight you dream of real food. Roasted chicken dripping with grease, a pie filled with apples, raisins, and spices you can't pronounce. Maybe some fish fresh, not pickled or dried, and a proper loaf of soft bread with golden crust. The kind of food the Lord eats. The kind of food you'll smell but never taste unless you're invited to serve it. You once helped in the manor kitchen. Just for a day. A festival required extra hands. You scrubbed floors, peeled onions, and quietly watched as pheasants were stuffed. Pies were braided and cakes were dusted with sugar, a substance so rare it was locked in a chest. One bite of that cake could pay your rent for a month. You didn't get to taste it, of course, but the smell lingered on your hands, and for a moment it was enough. You shake the memory off as you return to your chores. There's no time for daydreams when the pigs need slopping and the chickens need chasing. The animals eat better than you on some days, but they at least don't have to pay taxes. Mid-afternoon brings a visit from a traveling peddler. He carries sacks of dried fruit spices, smoked eels, and strange-looking nuts. The village gathers like moths to candlelight. You can't afford anything, but you stare anyway. The smells are intoxicating. A woman trades him a scarf for a handful of raisins. You envy her for a week. He also carries gossip. A famine struck 3 villages south. Crops failed. Some are eating bark. You quietly thank the Virgin for your turnips. They may be bland, but they grow like weeds and taste only marginally worse. There's also word of a miracle loaf that healed a blind man in York. You're skeptical. The last miracle was just moldy cheese and a lot of wishful thinking. Dinner, if you can call it that, is more of the same. Pottage again. Bread again. You chew slowly, hoping your imagination can fill in flavors. Someone claims to have seen a spice once. Cinnamon. It was red. Or maybe brown. Or maybe it was just wood shavings. Hard to say. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve and lean back against the wall. A A flickering tallow candle gives the room a sickly yellow glow. You stare at it, hypnotized by the flame, wondering what tomorrow's meal will be. Maybe more bread, maybe beans, maybe a miracle. You smile to yourself. A serf's humor is forged in scarcity. And in that silence between bites, you wonder if one day someone in the future will study your diet, squint at the records, and ask, how did they survive on that? With turnips mostly. And hope. The door creaks as you push it shut for the night, the wooden latch sliding into place with a dull clunk. It won't keep out much. A good gust of wind could probably knock it open, but it's more a ritual than a barrier. The day is done, the work is over for now, and you've survived long enough to return home. Time to savor the comforts of domestic life, which in your case means a one-room mud and straw hut, a smoky hearth, and the smell of damp everything. This is your home. The walls are a mix of wattle and daub wooden strips woven into panels plastered over with a hearty smear of mud straw manure and wishful thinking. You helped build it. Everyone helped build it. Serfs tend to build things communally because if your neighbor's hut collapses, guess who's hosting them next winter? The roof is thatched, but thatch doesn't mean warm. It means you will host an annual population of mice beetles and things you'd rather not identify by candlelight. In summer, it leaks in odd places. In winter, it freezes solid. In spring, it smells like wet goat. You've accepted all of this. Inside the hut is compact. That's the polite word. It's a single open space where everything you own is within arm's reach. A corner for sleeping, a hearth for cooking, and some shelves holding chipped pottery and bowls made from gnarled wood. The air is thick with smoke from the hearth because there's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that doubles as an entryway for rain and birds. The beds are little more than matted straw on wooden frames. You lie on one with your spouse, the kids curl up nearby, and the animals often sleep even closer. Yes, animals. The chickens roost inside the piglet curls beside the door, and the family cat owns the warmest corner. You're not sure when you ceded that territory, but the cat clearly won. Privacy. What's that? You dress, sleep, argue, and exist together in the same shared air. If someone snores, you all hear it. If someone rolls over too enthusiastically, everyone else wakes up. Intimacy becomes a kind of background noise. Modesty is a luxury for those with rooms, and yet oddly it works. You know every breath your children take. You hear their dreams, their sniffles, their soft fidgeting. You know when your spouse sighs with contentment and when they sigh with worry. It's all woven into the quiet rhythm of domestic life. Crowded, yes, claustrophobic. Often, but also comforting. You glance around the hut. A soot-streaked tapestry, technically a sack, hangs by the hearth to block drafts. An iron cooking pot rests in the embers, crusted with the remains of yesterday's pottage. Beside it, a basket of rushes used to scatter across the floor and soak up spills. You change them out every few weeks when they start to smell like swampy regret. A single wooden bench doubles as both dining table and storage. Underneath it, a pile of rags hides your family's entire wardrobe. 4 tunics, 2 cloaks, and a pair of shoes that's passed from one child to the next like a ceremonial crown. The shoes are slightly too small now, but no one mentions it. To complain would feel decadent. Your only luxury is a little iron lamp, gifted by a cousin who left the village and married a potter. It gives off just enough light to cast strange shadows on the walls, which the children like to interpret as stories. Tonight's looks like a knight or maybe a duck. It sparks a bedtime argument. You smile. Occasionally someone in the village adds a second room to their hut. A kind of lean-to built from scrap wood and determination. That's usually a sign they've either come into luck or are housing in-laws. You dream of such a room, a space for storing tools or even just standing upright without ducking. But there's a charm to your little dwelling. It creaks when the wind blows. It sings in rainstorms. It smells like ash, hay, onions, and sleep. And when the fire burns low and the voices fade, it wraps you in a cocoon of familiarity that no manor or palace could ever replicate. There's an ongoing joke among serfs. My house is so small, even the fleas complain. It's only partly a joke. The fleas are relentless, as are the lice. And the rats. You set traps, scatter herbs, and occasionally threaten them with curses, but they remain unimpressed. Quirky fact, some medieval homes used dried mint tansy and wormwood to deter pests. Did it work? Questionable, but at least it gave the fleas something to sneeze about. Historians still argue whether these herbal defenses were actually effective or just the medieval equivalent of "at least we tried." You hear the neighbors through the wall, thin as it is. Someone is singing, off key, probably drunk. Maybe it's a celebration, a good harvest, a new baby, or maybe someone finally got the slop bucket cleaned out. It doesn't take much to warrant a party. On particularly cold nights, the village sometimes shares fires, pushing families together in larger homes for warmth. You've slept elbow to elbow with neighbors and strangers alike, wrapped in borrowed blankets, whispering tales and trading gossip until sleep stole you away. Those nights, smoky and cramped, are oddly some of your warmest memories. You settle down now, wrapping yourself in a thin woolen blanket that's patched more than original. Your spouse curls beside you. The youngest child clutches a wooden spoon like a comfort toy. The piglet lets out a breathy grunt in its sleep. The candle flickers lower. And in this humble hut, shared with animals, whispers dreams. And 100 years of smoke, you close your eyes, grateful for the roof, however leaky. Because this place, as fragile as it is yours. Well, sort of. Technically, it belongs to the Lord. But the warmth, that's all yours. You wake with a start, not because of danger, but because the pig is snoring louder than usual. You blink in the early gloom years, tuned to the soft shifting of family, the occasional drip from the thatch, and the gentle shuffle of chickens rearranging themselves near the hearth. Everything seems quiet. Too quiet. Then you remember. Today's the day of tallying. It's when the steward and the reeve walk through the village with their lists, their questions, and their quills, jotting down what each household owes, what's been paid, what hasn't, and which poor soul might be dragged into the manor court for some transgression no one remembers committing. You sigh and begin preparing. It's hard to explain to someone from a different time what it means to be legally tied to a piece of earth. To know that you can't just leave, can't just say, "enough, pack your bag," and wander off into a better life, because you, my friend, are a serf, and you are not just on the land, you are the land. Your legal status is unfree. You are a villain, a bondman, a person who owes not just service and rent, but existence itself to the Lord who holds your village. That doesn't mean you're a slave, but the distinction can feel pretty academic when you're being fined for trimming your hedge too short without permission. The reeve, often one of your own neighbors, appointed or bullied into the job, acts as the Lord's watchdog. He knows everyone's business. Who traded what? Who borrowed which cow? Who's fallen behind on their obligations? He carries a stick with authority and a ledger with menace. And today he's on the move. You quickly sweep the front of your hut, arrange the firewood neatly, and set out the tools that technically belong to the manor, but live in your home. It's all part of the show. You want to appear compliant, orderly, respectful, mostly because you are those things, but also because anything less invites suspicion. You know how it works. The manor has the power to summon you to the local court for just about anything, failing to show up for week work. failing to pay a fee, failing to produce a piglet at the agreed upon time. The court itself is held right there in the open air, usually beneath a large tree, or on the village green presided over by the steward with a handful of fellow peasants watching on some board. Some smug, some just hoping the entertainment is better than last time. Punishments vary, a fine usually, or the loss of access to a strip of land. Public humiliation in the stocks if you're unlucky. In rare cases, physical punishment. And if the Lord is especially vindictive, you might lose your rights entirely. That is the few that remain. You've seen someone whipped for taking a shortcut through the Lord's orchard. Another was fined for gathering firewood in the wrong part of the forest. One young man, barely grown, was beaten for leaving the manor without permission to see his sister in a neighboring village. She had just given birth, didn't matter. Historians still argue whether lords consistently abused their legal authority or whether most kept their serfs reasonably protected to maintain productivity. You have your own opinion, and it involves a long string of whispered curses and a dead rooster. As the reeve finally reaches your hut, you nod politely. He nods back. You both pretend this is friendly. He asks about your debts. You produce a small bundle of dried herbs and a jug of thin ale, your agreed payment this month. He frowns but accepts it. It's not ideal, but times are hard. Everyone knows it. Then he asks a strange question. Have you seen Thomas? You blink. Thomas the wheelwright's son disappeared 3 nights ago. No one talks about it out loud. They say he slipped away in the dark chasing the dream of freedom. Maybe to the city. Maybe to join a monastery. Maybe to vanish into the trees forever. The reeve scratches a note into his book. You say nothing more. You don't know where Thomas went, and even if you did, you wouldn't tell, because part of you envies him. Not the danger, not the risk, but the choice. Thomas made a choice. You are not allowed to choose much, not where to live, not who to marry without permission, not what job to do or when to rest. If you want to send your child to apprentice with a tradesman in a nearby town, you'll need the Lord's approval and probably a bribe. Even travel is forbidden without a signed license, a kind of hall pass for grown-ups. Being caught without one can mean jail or worse. The borders of your world are drawn not by rivers or mountains, but by legal obligation. Still, there are tricks. If you live quietly, work hard, and don't make waves, the manor might leave you alone. Some lords are indifferent, more interested in hunting falcons than inspecting vegetable patches. Others are cruel. Most are just present. Overseeing your life like a distant storm cloud, always there, sometimes rumbling. You finish your duties for the reeve who moves on to the next hut. You exhale, shoulders relaxing slightly. No court summons, no new fines, no threats. That's a win. Inside your home, your spouse prepares a meager lunch. You sit hands in your lap, the weight of unfreedom pressing into your spine like a stone. You think about Thomas. You wonder what kind of life he's found. You wonder if he regrets it. You wonder if he's cold. And then, as if on cue, your youngest child spills the ale jug and begins crying. You jump up, mop the floor with your sleeve, and start laughing because the alternative is too heavy. This is your life. Owned, bound, restricted, but full of small, chaotic joys. And fleas, always the fleas. Sunday arrives with a softness you haven't felt in days. The morning sun filters down gently through the thatch. Birds chirp with surprising optimism. And there's a lull, just a sliver of stillness in the air. You lie there a little longer than usual. Not because you're lazy, no such luxury, but because for once the day isn't already knocking at your door with a pitchfork and a deadline. It's the Lord's Day. Not your Lord, of course, the Lord. Which means no labor, no hoeing, no hauling, no sweating into soil that belongs to someone else. Just church. Now, church isn't exactly a thrilling social event. It's long, it's Latin, and it's cold. But for a medieval serf, it's one of the rare chances to step out of pure survival mode and into something that at least pretends to be about your soul. Plus, it's where all the village news travels faster than fleas. You dress in your least filthy tunic and do your best to smooth down your hair. Your children are scrubbed behind the ears mostly, and your spouse has tied their belt with a little extra care. You don't look fancy, no one does, but you try. Because everyone sees everyone at church, and everyone judges everyone at church. The walk to the church is short but significant. You pass familiar faces: the grumpy widow who claims the Virgin speaks to her goats, the smith still smelling faintly of iron and ash, and the reeve whose presence you studiously ignore. Everyone's heading the same direction, and yet everyone's quietly competing for the appearance of righteousness. The church itself is the sturdiest building in the village. Stone walls, a simple wooden roof. Stained glass if you're lucky you're not. It's cold in winter, hot in summer, and echoey all year round. And no one understands the Latin. You settle onto a wooden bench and shift uncomfortably. There are no cushions. The priest begins his sermon in the rich, droning tones of a man who knows no one can interrupt him. You listen not so much to the words as to the rise and fall of his voice, the rhythm of it. It's oddly hypnotic, like rain on a thatch roof or pigs rooting in the mud. Today's sermon seems to be about temptation, or sin, or taxes. It's hard to tell. You drift. Someone coughs behind you. A child fidgets. A baby wails briefly before being bribed with a piece of bread. The priest doesn't pause. He never does. Eventually, there's a moment of relief, the kiss of peace. Everyone turns to their neighbors, offering a nod or clasped hands. It's more than just ritual, it's gossip time. Whispers bloom like spring weeds. Did you hear about Thomas gone 3 days now? They say he joined outlaws, know a monastery. He always liked candles. He was sweet on Margaret, that's why he left. I heard Margaret's expecting. You raise your eyebrows. Margaret's seated 2 rows ahead, looking righteously innocent. The plot thickens. After the service, the crowd lingers outside, reluctant to return to huts and chores just yet. This is the village's best source of drama. You trade quiet words with your neighbor about the coming harvest. There's concern that the barley will be light this year. The priest joins a circle of women asking for prayers for their livestock. One man is trying to barter a chicken for a pair of boots. Church isn't just church. It's courtroom, council, chamber, dating service, and community bulletin board. If something happens in the village, it happens here, just not necessarily during the sermon. You take a walk around the churchyard. The graves are marked by simple stones, often inscribed with crosses or crude initials. A few mounds are fresh. You stop at one, nod silently. It's your cousin. Died in winter, too young. Fever, probably. Or maybe something worse. No one's sure. That the village doctor, a barber, really prescribed a leeching. It didn't work. There's a theory going around that churchyards can cure toothaches if you walk counterclockwise 3 times around a certain grave. You tried it once, your teeth still hurt. Lunch today is blessed. Literally. The priest sprinkles holy water over loaves of bread and mugs of ale, then sends everyone off with vague absolution and a sermon handout in the form of guilt. At home, you stretch out in the sun while your spouse reheats yesterday's pottage. The children chase each other barefoot through the mud, shrieking with delight. You half listen for danger, but mostly just enjoy the sound. It's rare. You talk to your neighbor across the fence, if you can call a few branches a fence. He mentions rumors of a relic passing through a nearby town. A bone of Saint someone or other, healing powers, or maybe it glows. You can't tell if he believes it or if he just wants to believe something. Don't we all? Historians still argue whether these relics actually brought communities together or simply acted as traveling money traps wrapped in velvet. Either way, people flock to them. You'd go too if the manor allowed it. You spend the rest of the afternoon weaving, mending, and carving acceptable non-work activities. It's restful by Serf standards. As evening falls, the air thickens with the smell of wood smoke and spiced cider. Someone must be celebrating. You remember it's a name day. There will be singing and possibly dancing if the reeve doesn't intervene. You wander over. There's music badly tuned but enthusiastic. A boy with a pipe, a girl tapping rhythm on an upturned bucket, and someone singing a folk tune that might be about sheep, but could also be about heartbreak. Hard to say. The line between livestock and romance is surprisingly thin in some verses. You clap along, you laugh, you forget for a while. Someone brings out a cake. It's flat, dense, and slightly burned, but cake is cake. You take a piece and chew slowly. It tastes like honey and smoke. As the moon rises, the crowd thins. You walk home content. Not happy exactly, but filled with a strange peace. Church didn't save your soul today, but it reminded you you're not alone. Tomorrow you'll return to the fields. The toil will resume. The reeve will frown. The turnips will not pick themselves. But tonight you rest. In your own way you've worshipped. In your own way you've lived. And under a sky older than lords or laws, you whisper thanks for a day without burdens, even if it came wrapped in Latin. You wake in the middle of the night with your gums throbbing like little drums inside your head. The rest of the hut is silent except for the occasional shifting of a child's limbs and the soft snore of the piglet near the hearth. You lie still, breathing through your mouth, afraid to move your jaw. Toothache, again. You've lived with it for so long now it feels like a relative. One you didn't invite, who won't leave, and who sometimes screams in your face when the weather changes. You rub your cheek and think back to when the pain first started, probably months ago. Maybe years. The bread was too hard, or a root cracked, or maybe it was just time. Everyone's teeth eventually go. That's the rule, but you try to go back to sleep, but the throbbing won't let you. Instead, you drift into a strange half-consciousness where time moves sideways and the ache pulses like a second heartbeat. At dawn, you finally sit up and spit into a cloth. There's blood. You say nothing. No one else in the house is surprised, and it's just part of life now. You swish your mouth with cold ale and hope the feeling passes before your jaw swells up like a turnip. There is no doctor in the village. There is a midwife who knows her herbs and an old man who calls himself a bone setter. Though you're pretty sure he once stitched a dog to a boot by mistake. For real medicine, you'd need to walk miles to the nearest town, and even then medicine is a loose term. The most accessible option is the barber surgeon. Traveling occasionally drunk and suspiciously eager with his tools. He pulls teeth drains, boils, sets bones, and offers leeches for everything in between. Once you saw him wrap a burned hand in a mixture of butter, ash, and goose grease. The hand turned purple. The patient died. Still, when he visits next, you might let him take the tooth. If he's sober, if he'll do it for a loaf of rye. The village deals with sickness the way it deals with everything else together, but helplessly. Your neighbor's daughter had a fever last month. She was wrapped in warm cloth, prayed over fed gruel, and left to either recover or die. She lived, but no one really knows why. Maybe it was the herbs. Maybe it was the virgin. Maybe she was just lucky. When someone is seriously ill, word spreads fast. People bring offerings, candles, charms, or coins if they have them. A priest might bless the sickbed. If things get desperate, someone might call in the cunning woman, the herbalist who lives near the edge of the woods and smells like moss and vinegar. She knows things. She's helped before. She's also been accused of witchcraft twice. But when the choice is between superstition and death, no one's picky. You've used her remedies yourself. A poultice of onions for a cough? A syrup made from honey nettle and something bitter you couldn't identify. One time she gave you a charm made of knotted thread and bones meant to ward off infection. You still keep it just in case. There's a strange intersection of faith and folk magic in your world. You pray, of course, you always do. But you also spit over your shoulder when a black dog crosses your path. You tie ribbons to certain trees. You avoid cutting your nails on a Tuesday, just in case. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were signs of spiritual crisis or just desperate people hedging their bets. You know exactly what it is it's trying everything, because you can't afford to try nothing. One of your children has a cough now. Dry, sharp, and lingering? Not dangerous yet, but it could be. You've seen coughs like that turn into chest infections and then into silence. Too many mothers in the village have buried children for you to be casual about it. You boil herbs, you rub the child's back, you tell stories to distract them. You listen through the night for changes in the rhythm of their breathing. If things get worse, you'll bring them to the cunning woman. You'll offer your last egg or a woven basket or your husband's only hat if you must. Because there is no greater terror in a serf's world than a sick child and no way to help. Death is everywhere. In the fields where accidents happen with scythes and carts. In the homes where childbirth and fevers claim the strong. In the forests where outlaws or wild animals make short work of the foolish. And always, always in the seasons. Winter steals the old. Summer brings strange rashes. Spring and fall are kindest but never safe. And yet life goes on. Today you rise, shake off your own pain, and go to work. Because you must. The barley won't tend itself. The manor doesn't pause for illness. The reeve won't excuse you because your molar is infected and your child is wheezing. You do what every serf does. You keep going. You see an old friend in the field. He has a boil on his neck the size of a plum. He shrugs. It's not talking yet, he jokes. You laugh. Gallows humor is the village's best medicine. By midday, your child's cough improves. You breathe easier even though your own jaw is starting to swell. That's how it works. You suffer, then survive. Or not. But always you endure. And when the stars come out and the hut settles into quiet again, you press a cloth to your face. Pray for the tooth to fall out cleanly and hope. Tomorrow, if the fever comes, you'll go to the healer. Or the priest. Or both. You'll do what you always do, everything you can. And maybe, just maybe it'll be enough. The bell sounds from the manor, echoing across the fields like a groggy yawn from a giant who's just remembered he owns everyone. You stretch joints popping like old wooden hinges and stare into the smoky hearth where your breakfast simmers. It's just more pottage yesterday's leftovers thickened into something vaguely spoonable, but you're not complaining. Not today. Today is a festival day. Not a real holiday, mind you. You'll still work. But it's a feast day sanctioned by the church and grudgingly acknowledged by the Lord, which means there will be music dancing, and if the saints are kind, a chance to eat something that didn't come out of the same pot you've used all week. You take a little extra time brushing the straw from your cloak. Your spouse braids their hair. The children are already squabbling over who gets to wear the better of the two tunics with intact sleeves. The air hums with anticipation. Festivals are rare, maybe 4 or 5 big ones a year, and no one wants to miss them. They're like lightning in the medieval fog, brief flashes of color noise and communal absurdity. By mid-morning, the village green is alive. A fiddler you barely recognize is tuning his instrument by ear, which is unfortunate because his ear has clearly been through some things. A man with a lute joins in. The sound they produce is not entirely unlike music. Children dart between hay bales and benches. Women gather in clusters exchanging gossip and herbs. Men pretend they're not already drunk. And off to the side, the reeve paces like a wet cat, clearly annoyed that anyone is enjoying themselves on his watch. The festival begins with a mass because of course it does. But afterward things loosen. The ale flows, the bread is passed around. Someone roasts a pig, or at least what looks like a pig, and the smell wraps itself around the crowd like a promise. You queue for your portion: stew, brown bread, and a slice of cheese so sharp it might be a weapon. It's a rare treat. Cheese like this usually lives behind the Lord's pantry door. There's also a game starting a kind of chaotic wrestling meets tag meets public hazard called mob football. The goal is vague. The rules are looser than the scribe's handwriting. One team chases a half-deflated pig's bladder across a muddy field, while the other team pretends to care about victory while mostly aiming not to lose teeth. You don't play. You've learned your lesson after the last time you took an elbow to the ear and couldn't hear out of it for 3 weeks. But your eldest child joins full of bluster and confidence and promptly gets tackled by a boy twice his size. You clap politely. Next comes the maypole dance. It's not May technically, but no one's counting. Bright ribbons are tied to the pole, half of them already knotted from last year, and young people spiral around it, weaving patterns, giggling, and very pointedly not looking at the people they have crushes on. You remember doing the same. Your spouse caught your eye across a pole once. You've been teasing them about it ever since. Someone pulls out a hurdy-gurdy. No one knows who owns it. No one ever does. It just appears when festivals happen like a summoned demon of noise. Then come the contest, bread baking, herb guessing, pig calling, and of course, drunken poetry. You participate in the herb challenge, correctly identifying rosemary, yarrow, and something suspicious that might be moss. You win second place and are awarded a small apple. You eat it immediately. By late afternoon, the green is littered with the exhausted, the overfed, and the heavily ale-infused. That's when the steward shows up. He's wearing his best cloak, the one with the fur trim, and the slightly ridiculous feathered hat. He climbs onto a crate and declares that the Lord will forgive the next 3 unpaid taxes if the villagers perform the traditional harvest song and dance correctly. You exchange glances with your neighbor. This is a trap. The harvest song is long, complex, and requires 6 people to remember 6 different verses in order. The last time it was performed, someone sang the wheat verse twice, and the entire thing collapsed into laughter and fines. But you try anyway. You sing, you forget a verse, you add a verse about parsnips, and somehow miraculously the steward is too drunk to notice. The crowd erupts in laughter. Even the reeve smiles, just a little. You find a patch of grass and collapse next to your spouse. The children are sticky with honey, dirt, and pride. You watch as a pair of dogs chase each other in dizzying circles. Someone nearby is singing a lullaby in a language you don't recognize. It's beautiful and sad and entirely out of place, but somehow it fits. A few villagers dance slowly, arms looped around each other, feet dragging in time to music that's more emotion than rhythm. You sway a little, not dancing, not still, just existing. The ale warms your belly. The sky is beginning to blush with sunset. And then come the fines. Yes, because joy must always be balanced. The steward recovers just enough sobriety to remember that certain villagers were too enthusiastic or wasted bread or danced with improper rhythm. He doles out small punishments, a few hens, a basket of eggs, a week of extra field duty. It's almost ceremonial, a price paid for happiness. You're lucky, this time your name isn't called. Historians still debate whether these post-festival fines were deliberately exploitative or just awkward attempts at order. You don't care. You're just glad your family got through the day without owing livestock. As darkness creeps in, people drift home. The fire pits are doused, the music slows, and laughter softens into silence. You carry a sleeping child in your arms, feeling the weight of joy and exhaustion in equal measure. Back in the hut, you tuck everyone in your fingers, still sticky from stolen jam. Your spouse whispers, "That was a good one." You nod. Because it was. For one day, you weren't just a serf, you were part of something bigger. Messy, chaotic, joyful. And now back to turnips tomorrow. But tonight you dream of maypoles, bread, and laughter. And you smile in your sleep. You can already feel the cold sneaking through the cracks in the walls before your eyes open. Winter is here. Not just a chill in the air, not just a morning frost, but real winter. The kind that curls around your bones and settles into the corners of your hut like an unwelcome relative who never learned about boundaries. You sit up slowly, breath visible in the gray morning gloom, and listen to the creak of the roof under the weight of snow. Your toes are numb. So are your fingers. You pull on your heaviest tunic wool coarse, patched in 3 different places, and wrap a strip of cloth around your head. It won't help much, but it gives your ears the illusion of protection. The hearth is dark. There's not much firewood left. You burn it sparingly now, rationed like bread in a famine. A few twigs, a scrap of peat if you're lucky, maybe a chunk of dried cow dung if you're feeling bold. The hut smells like old smoke, mildew, and wet wool, and somehow it's comforting. Outside, the snow crunches underfoot as you step into the pale dawn. Everything is quiet. Snow silences the world, muffling even the squawk of the chickens or the whinny of the manor's horses. It turns the familiar into something alien. The thatched roofs, the crooked fences, even the village well, it all looks frozen in time. Winter in the life of a medieval serf is not a season, it's a test. There's no work in the fields now. The earth is too hard, the crops long harvested. That means no week work, no plowing, no weeding. It should be a rest. But there's no rest when you're trying to stay alive. Without field work, you do maintenance, repairing tools, mending clothes, patching holes in the walls. You help neighbors with thatching, collect frozen dung for fuel, or take turns shoveling snow from the paths. The manor still expects service, of course. Just because the land sleeps doesn't mean the steward does. But what you mostly do in winter is endure. You huddle with your family wrapped in every blanket you own. You rotate near the fire so no one loses toes. You boil the same pot of dried beans and herbs until it resembles sadness in a bowl. You listen for coughs and pray they're not the kind that linger. There's no fresh food, nothing green, nothing growing. You rely on what you've stored: sacks of dried peas, turnips buried in straw, a few onions clinging desperately to life. Bread gets harder by the day. You once broke a tooth trying to eat a crust in February. The pig won that year. Preservation is everything. Salting, smoking, pickling. These are your miracles. Your neighbor's family has a single smoked ham. They're saving for Candlemas. They talk about it like it's royalty. Tonight your supper is dried cabbage and stale rye. You chew slowly, trying not to focus on how thin everyone looks. The children get thinner in winter. You remember that winter 3 years ago when the ice came early and stayed long. When the stew pot never quite boiled and the thatch caved in under snow and the neighbor's hut caught fire from an overturned lantern. You remember burying 3 children before spring. 2 from sickness, 1 from hunger. You never speak their names aloud, but you still see them in the corners of your dreams. This winter isn't as bad. Yet, but you've learned not to speak too soon. You cough into your sleeve and glance toward the bucket of snow melting beside the hearth. That's your water for the day. You'll use it to cook, to wash a bit, to splash your face and trick yourself into feeling fresh. It's cleaner than the summer stream, at least. One upside: you spend part of the day mending boots, layers of leather sewn with gut string. Your fingers fumble in the cold and the needle slips more than once. Blood dots the fabric. You wipe it away, nothing new. Outside, a group of boys throws snow at each other, screaming and laughing like winter is a game. You smile. Children are too young to realize how close life and death hold hands in the snow. They build a lopsided snowman and call it the steward. You don't laugh out loud, but the corner of your mouth twitches. Inside, your spouse tells stories. Long ones. Folk tales of saints and sinners, witches and wolves, enchanted loaves of bread that feed whole villages. The children listen wide-eyed. You've heard them all before. You don't care. The stories keep the cold out of your minds, if not your bones. Then comes the scratching. At the door. A knock or maybe claws no. Just a neighbor wrapped in cloaks and worry. Her husband has a fever. Bad. She asks if you have any herbs left. You do. Barely. You hand her what you can and hope she'll remember it later when the debts are counted in spring. You step out into the yard to stretch. The sky is white, not cloudy white. A blanket of pale nothing. The kind of sky that forgets the sun exists. And that's when you notice the footprints. A fox maybe, or something worse. You follow them for a few paces, then stop. It doesn't matter, there's always something out there. Wolves are rare but not unheard of. You've heard of entire flocks disappearing overnight. The forest doesn't sleep just because the fields do. You head back inside. The door groans as you shut it and you pull the blanket tighter. Winter is not your enemy, not exactly, but it is indifferent. It doesn't hate you, it just doesn't care. And that somehow is worse. Historians still debate whether the medieval serfs feared winter more than plague. You know the answer. Winter is the plague, slow, hungry, and always coming back. You pile more straw at the foot of the bed. The children curl together like pups. You and your spouse lie back to back, sharing what little body heat you have left. And as the fire sputters low and the wind moans through the thatch like a ghost with complaints, you whisper a quiet prayer. Not for warmth, but for spring. You wake to a sound you haven't heard in weeks, water dripping from the thatch, not as ice but as rain. Real wet, sloshy rain. It's early spring, or close enough to pretend. The air still bites, but the light has changed. It's softer, less gray, more green. Mud, of course, is now the reigning monarch. Every path, every yard, every field is a glistening mire of brown slop. You step outside the hut and instantly regret not tying rags around your feet. Squelch. One step in, and your toes have already lost the will to live. But you don't care, because things are stirring again. The hens are restless. The children are louder. The neighbor's cow gave birth last night, and already people are bartering for its future milk. Spring is the beginning of everything for a serf. It's when the soil opens its sleepy eyes, when seeds return to the earth, and when hope, thin as it is, pokes its head above ground to see if it's safe. You know it isn't. But you still plant. Today, you'll work your own strip of land finally. That tiny ribbon of manor field that you're allowed to farm for your family's survival. The Lord's fields still take precedence, of course, but you've been granted 2 days to begin your planting before your week work begins again. You head toward your allotment, a crude plow slung over one shoulder, the ox following slowly behind like a bored cousin. You don't own the ox. You borrow him from a neighbor who in exchange will borrow your eldest son's back for some fence work next week. It's an economy of shoulders and favors. Bartering is the bloodstream of serf life. You don't use coin. Most of the time you wouldn't know what to do with a coin. You trade work for goods, for food, for labor, for forgiveness. Everything loops. You remember when your spouse traded 2 skeins of homespun wool for a half-rotted wheelbarrow. You fixed it. It lasted the entire season. That was a good year. Sometimes you even trade with the steward's household. The reeve turns a blind eye so long as the transactions don't get too prosperous. If someone gets too clever or too successful, starts stockpiling a few too many turnips, or upgrading to linen, you can bet the manor will rediscover a forgotten fee. Still, it's the quiet trades that keep you all afloat. One woman spins flax into thread and swaps it for eggs. A boy carves spoons to buy his grandmother bread. An old man repairs leather boots in exchange for ale. You once mended a roof for half a jar of honey and a tale about a rooster who allegedly outwitted a priest. These exchanges don't appear in the steward's ledger, but they're what make the village run. The plow drags through the muddy field, biting deep into the cold soil. It takes everything in your arms to steer it straight, and the ox isn't particularly motivated. Your hands blister. Your shoulders scream. Your back mutters something impolite. But the furrows are beautiful. Rows of dark, rich earth ready to hold seeds. Beans, barley, maybe a few peas if you can spare them. You save these seeds over winter hidden in a clay pot beside the hearth. If they fail, you don't eat. Simple as that. As you plant, a neighbor walks past pushing a wheelbarrow full of manure. You nod in greeting, they grimace. The wheelbarrow squeaks like a guilty conscience. You chat briefly, complaints about the reeve, hopes for rain, a theory that putting an onion under your pillow keeps rats away. You both know it doesn't, but the conversation is warm. You trade half a sack of seed potatoes for help repairing your fence. Verbal contract. No parchment, no seal. Just a handshake and a nod. That's enough. You pause midday to chew on a crust and drink some ale from a flask. The sun peeks out for a minute and everything feels golden and muddy and alive. A bird sings. You don't recognize the tune. Doesn't matter, it's a good sound. You return to work, hands deep in the dirt. The earth has a smell now. Not the dead frozen scent of winter, but something musty and green. The promise of crops. The promise of maybe not starving this year. Historians still argue whether serfs were entirely dependent on their lord's goodwill for survival, or whether this informal economy, this serf-to-serf support network, was more resilient than it seemed. You don't need a historian to tell you the truth. You live it. You've borrowed, bartered, begged, and occasionally lied to get what your family needs, and you've given just as freely. That's the quiet system beneath the manor's noisy rules, the economy of kindness, the currency of community. By sunset, your knees are coated in mud, your fingers are raw, but your rows are planted. You look at the field and feel a strange pride. It's not much, but it's yours, until the Lord reclaims it, of course. Or the steward redraws the allotments. Or the reeve fines you for planting too close to the footpath. But for now, this strip of brown, muddy, hopeful land is yours. You walk home slowly, sack empty, body aching and brain buzzing with fatigue. Your spouse greets you with a bowl of lukewarm stew and a kiss on the cheek. The children are asleep. The fire is low but still burning. You lie down and let the ache spread over you like a blanket. Tomorrow will be harder. The Lord's fields will need plowing. The steward will frown. The ox will step on your foot. But tonight you remember what it feels like to grow something, to trade, to plant hope in the ground with your bare hands, and pray that spring keeps her promises. Your boots are soaked again, and your tunic smells like wet sheep. It's matchmaking season. Well, not officially. No banners, no scrolls, no candlelit courtship rituals here. But in the muddy reality of your village spring and early summer mean more than just plowing and planting. They mean weddings, pairings, agreements, dowries measured in chickens, and enough awkward eye contact across the maypole to make anyone reconsider monastic life. Your neighbor's daughter Maud is being courted, which means you've suddenly become aware of how every glance, every shared walk to the well, every suspiciously long conversation by the hedgerow is now village currency. Everyone notices, everyone talks, and if there's a whiff of romance in the air, someone's already bartering eggs for a wedding feast. You remember your own marriage? It wasn't exactly a tale for the bards. No long speeches, no romantic letters. You were both of age, you both had strong backs and decent teeth, and your parents had enough goats between them to negotiate an understanding. A practical match. You liked each other well enough. Love came later, or maybe it grew sideways like a weed you didn't notice until it bloomed in the thatch. In the world of serfs, marriage is less about candle-lit dinners and more about timing livestock and the Lord's permission. Yes, you need permission to marry, because under feudal law your body is technically part of the estate. If you marry someone from another manor, that's a loss of labor, a loss of profit, a disturbance to the carefully tracked balance of field and flesh. To marry legally, you submit a request. It goes to the steward who grunts at it, then to the lord who probably doesn't care unless your betrothed is from a rival estate. If you marry without approval, that's a fine, or worse, forced separation. There's even a recorded case of a young couple chained to opposite corners of the manor yard for a week as punishment. Historians still argue whether that was symbolic discipline or just a particularly spiteful reeve with no love life of his own. But for most, the permission is granted eventually, and then comes the haggling. Marriage, after all, is a transaction. Dowries matter. Sometimes it's a pig. Sometimes it's a blanket. Once it was a particularly docile goat that didn't kick. That match was considered a roaring success. In your case, your father traded a pair of boots, 3 bundles of kindling, and a promise to repair a fence. Your spouse's family threw in 2 clay pots and a hen that never laid eggs again after the ceremony. The village priest said the union was blessed. You still joke that it was the most expensive chicken funeral ever held. Weddings themselves are loud, muddy, and full of bread. The ceremony happens in the church, of course, with the priest mumbling blessings in Latin that no one understands. But the real celebration happens after dancing, drinking, and inappropriate toasts from people you wish had stayed home. You remember your wedding feast. There was bread, a stew made from something unidentifiable, and a man who fell into a bucket during the first dance. He later became your son's godfather. You can't remember why. Love between serfs isn't all that different from love anywhere else. It grows in glances and shared chores and laughter over spilled ale and whispered stories beneath a leaky roof. You've seen couples fall in love slowly through decades of side-by-side hoeing and arguing over turnip storage. You've also seen whirlwind romances, the kind where 2 young fools lock eyes across a dung pile and swear eternal loyalty. Some last. Some burn out faster than last winter's firewood. Tonight you sit outside your hut sharpening a blade while your eldest speaks softly with a girl from the next village over. He's trying to impress her with a joke about cabbage. It's not going well. You smile. Later, over supper, your spouse tells you that Edith, the miller's daughter, was seen holding hands with the weaver's apprentice. Scandalous, especially since she once declared loudly that she'd never marry a man who couldn't lift a sack of grain. Turns out love can forgive weak arms if there's a strong enough chin. Courtship here is informal, but it follows rules. Long walks, shared chores, offers to help with gathering herbs, a gift of a carved trinket or a woven bracelet. One boy wrote a love poem once it rhymed cheese with please and became a village legend. He's now married, not to the girl who received the poem. For serfs, love is patient, or at least persistent. There are no private candlelit dinners, no getaways, no surprise gifts from expensive merchants. Instead, there are shy glances at mass giggles by the well and long conversations while repairing fences that never needed repairing in the first place. There's also heartbreak. A girl whose match was refused by the manor? A boy who left for the monastery rather than watch the girl he loved marry a butcher's son with 3 goats and a better dowry? A woman widowed too young who never remarried, saying one heart's enough to give in one lifetime. You still think about that one. Marriage binds 2 people, but it also binds 2 households, 2 strips of land, 2 sets of duties and debts. It's community infrastructure woven into every field and furrow. Still at night, you look across the hearth at the person you married and think, not about goats or dowries or permissions, but about the way they tucked the children in, or how they mended your sleeve, or how they always hum when the stew boils. You didn't marry for love, but you live in it, and that perhaps is enough. A soft thud jolts you from your afternoon doze, a cabbage lobbed gently by your youngest lands squarely on your foot. You look up to find them grinning hands, muddy face, sunburned, and proud beyond reason. I helped pull it, they announce triumphant. You chuckle. It's a fine cabbage, you reply. They beam and you realize yet again how quickly they're growing. Too quickly. Raising children as a medieval serf is like planting seeds in stony soil. You do your best, but so much is up to the weather, the worms, and the whims of fate. There's no real childhood, not the way people will one day imagine it. No toys, no long idle summers, no school bells and lunches packed in little sacks. Childhood here is brief, muddy, and highly productive. Your children learn to work before they learn to read, and most won't ever read. By age 5 or 6, they're helping in the field, fetching water, herding geese, picking weeds, hauling things half their size. No one calls it cruel, it's just what life requires. They're not precious, they're necessary. You remember carrying your eldest in a sling while you sowed seed. They cried when the wind kicked up dust. You laughed and someone nearby muttered, another worker in the making. By age 8 or 9, your children can plant weed carry bundles and even cook basic pottage. By 10, they're nearly indistinguishable from the adults, just slightly shorter and more likely to eat dirt for no reason. There are joys, though. The laughter when they discover frogs. The way they hum songs you don't remember teaching them. The fierce pride they feel when they're trusted to carry a basket of eggs alone, and the silent devastation when they drop one. Discipline is swift and communal. You raise your children, but so does your neighbor, your aunt the reeve, the priest, the smith, and the cow who once headbutted your son for poking it too often. Every adult is a guardian. Every adult is also a potential scold. And yet somehow your children learn to navigate it all. They learn which elders are kind, which ones can be bribed with flattery, and which ones are hiding honey behind the bread rack. Education, such as it is, happens at home. You teach them to count using stones, to measure flour by feel, to tie knots, to avoid falling into the well. If you're lucky, the parish priest might agree to teach them a few Latin prayers. They won't understand them, but they'll recite them anyway, all solemn and wide-eyed. One year, a traveling monk passed through and agreed to teach a few of the brighter children their letters in exchange for eggs and lodging. Your eldest joined the lessons for 2 weeks, then dropped out to chase chickens instead. They said the monk smelled funny and didn't smile enough. You don't blame them. Books are rare. Paper is expensive. Ink is even worse. The only book you've seen up close is the Bible chained to the church lectern. It's beautiful, terrifying, and smells like damp secrets. Still, knowledge trickles down in other ways. Through songs, stories, proverbs. You've told your children the same tales your mother told you about the clever fox, the foolish knight, the saint who turned barley into bread. They roll their eyes, but they listen. Because in a world with no toys and no maps, stories are the magic. Play when it happens is woven into work. Your children chase geese while fetching water. They carve stickmen while waiting for the pot to boil. They play at being reeves and lords and knights, imitating voices they shouldn't know and arguments they shouldn't have heard. You caught your youngest once reenacting the steward's last tantrum, complete with furrowed brow and a fistful of imaginary parchment. It was disturbingly accurate. You know the dangers, too. Disease strikes children hardest. Fever, rot, plague, hunger. You've buried two. One barely spoke before the cough took him. The other laughed like rain hitting a tin cup and disappeared in the coldest week of winter. There was no warning. One day she was playing with a ribbon. The next she was still. You planted rosemary near her grave. It still grows. Historians still argue whether serfs truly mourned like modern parents do, or if high child mortality made families more detached. You know the answer. You felt the answer. Every parent here does. So you hold the living ones closer. You laugh too loudly at their jokes. You save the good bread crust for them. You tie charms above their beds even if the priest frowns at such things. And when one learns something new, how to tie a bundle, how to tell north by moss, how to guess the weather by the scent of the wind, you feel the pride burn in your chest like sunlight. Your eldest, now nearly grown, speaks of apprenticing with a carpenter in the next village. It's a big decision, one that would take him away from the fields, from you, from everything he's known. But it would be a chance, a skill, a step beyond the furrowed earth. You hesitate, but you know, one day they must grow their own row. Tonight the children sleep curled together like kittens. You sit by the fire mending a tunic that's been patched so many times it's more memory than fabric. You hum a lullaby you half remember, and your spouse joins in softly. This is not an easy life, but in the flicker of firelight, watching the slow rise and fall of your children's breath, you allow yourself to believe it's a beautiful one. You're ankle deep in mud again, holding a spade with a splinter the size of a splintering thought when your neighbor trudges past and mutters, "Looks like the saints are in a foul mood." You both glance at the sky. Clouds like overcooked cabbage stew are rolling in from the east, and the air smells like soggy wool and bad decisions. You nod grimly and get back to digging. The weather rules your life. You don't just observe it, you live inside it. A serf's fortunes rise and fall with the seasons, and the seasons often come bearing teeth. One good harvest means you might eat through winter. One bad storm can take that hope and stomp it into the ground with muddy boots. Everyone talks about the weather. It's not small talk, it's survival. This year, the spring started too dry. Then came the rains, relentless, vengeful, and absurd. Fields flooded, seed washed away, and your ox got stuck up to his belly in a puddle that used to be a path. You and 3 others had to drag him out with ropes, curses, and a suspiciously large amount of cheese bribes. You learned early on to read the sky like scripture. The color of the clouds, the direction of the wind, the way the birds go silent. If the crows gather near the churchyard at dawn, it'll rain before noon. If your knees hurt, the frost is returning. If the hedgehogs are restless, expect thunder, or maybe just a hedgehog-related accident. It's not just folklore, it's experience, passed down in whispers, curses, and calloused hands. But still, no matter how well you prepare, the weather never truly cooperates. One year it hailed in July. You lost half your barley. Another time frost came in early September. The cabbages died. Then there was the drought when the wells dried up and people started arguing over the stream like dogs over a dry bone. You've seen people dig new ditches with nothing but spoons. You've seen neighbors pray over empty water barrels. You've even heard someone tried to bribe the weather with offerings a loaf of honey bread left in the woods. The birds ate it. The rain didn't come. And when the disasters hit, it's not just the crops that suffer, it's everything. Hunger walks through the village like a creditor collecting bones. You've seen grown men weep over ruined wheat, women tearing their hair out over rotten onions, children licking salt stones just to taste something. This isn't rare, it's expected. So you hedge your bets. You grow more beans because they're hardy. You save seed in secret, hiding it in cloth sacks under the floorboards. You plant garlic in the dryer strips and hope the geese don't eat it. You even tried interplanting leeks and carrots once. It didn't work, but it felt scientific. The priest says God sends weather to test us. You nod when he says it, but privately you suspect God might be asleep at the plow, or at least playing favorites. Some villagers put faith in charms. A red ribbon tied to the scarecrow, a carved symbol over the doorway, a chicken foot hung near the well. Historians still argue whether these practices were sincere beliefs or just acts of desperation. You say, why not both? You've got one such charm tucked into the folds of your cloak now. A tiny bag of dried rosemary hawthorn and something that smells faintly of regret. The cunning woman made it. She said it would appease the sky. You don't ask questions. One thing you've learned is that the weather is rarely neutral. It's either too much or too little, too soon or too late. And it always comes at a cost. Take last week, a windstorm tore through the village. It ripped the roof from the Reeves grain shed, flattened half the chicken pens, and turned your thatch into a sad topiary. You spent the next morning chasing straw across the fields, while your children laughed and called it sky hay. You tried to laugh too. Sort of. Today, though, you're waiting for the rain. You can feel it in your teeth. You hoe faster, pushing to get the last row done before the sky breaks open. It does, eventually. With all the subtlety of a shouting night in a chapel, you're drenched in seconds. The field turns to soup. Your boots squelch. Your cloak flaps like a dying bird. And still you keep working. Because the rain won't stop the work. It just makes it more unpleasant. You remember faintly a saying your grandmother used to mutter, "The sky doesn't care if you're tired." And she was right. Back in the hut, you strip off your soaked clothes, wring out your sleeves, and sit by the fire in a fog of steam and dampness. Your spouse hands you a bowl of warm broth. No questions, just heat. Just care. The children are playing with river stones near the hearth, lining them up like soldiers. One of them names the stones after clouds. You smile. Maybe there'll be a weather watcher, too. You think about the future, about whether your children will also fight the earth and the sky, whether they'll also plead with clouds and curse the wind, or whether someday someone will tame the weather. Write it down, predict it, even use it. That seems like magic now, but maybe it will be history one day. For now, you rest. The rain falls steadily outside like a lullaby sung by an annoyed god. And in your hut, warm and flickering, you sleep. Because tomorrow the sun might shine. And if it does, you'll be waiting. Hu in Halt, eyes on the sky. The road outside the village is unusually dusty for this time of year, evidence of travelers, or maybe just the wind dragging its feet. You squint up the path as a faint clinking sound grows louder, hooves, harness, and armor perhaps. That's when you see them. Strangers. 2 men on horseback, one cloaked in deep blue with a polished helmet, the other carrying scrolls in a saddlebag. They ride slowly as though surveying the land. A third walks behind them, leading a mule loaded with chests and sacks. You duck your head instinctively as they pass. Everyone does. Eye contact with men like these never brings good news. Whispers flutter through the village like startled birds. Are they tax collectors? Soldiers, inspectors from the king? Maybe even recruiters for a war no one asked about. You shuffle back toward your hut, gripping your hoe as if it might somehow defend you. You don't want attention. Attention means fees or forced labor, or worse, conscription. In your world, luck is not being noticed, but they stop at the church. Of course, they always do. The priest greets them, nervously, hands folded. You can't hear the words, only the tone's deference tension duty. After a few moments, a boy runs to the manor to alert the steward. You wait. Eventually, the scroll-bearer unrolls a parchment and begins listing names. Yours isn't called this time, but your friend's is. He frowns, wipes his hands on his tunic, and joins the group with a resigned slump. Something about a census, someone mutters. A census, great. It means officials are tallying people and property counting oxen, listing fields, inspecting pigs. Not for curiosity's sake, no, they're planning taxes, or raising troops, or reshuffling debts, or all three. You sigh. You were hoping to finish your planting before the next burden arrived. But here it is, right on time. This is your life plans made in the mud and undone by parchment. The official economy of serfdom is built on ledgers, scrolls, and assumptions. The Lord assumes you're alive and working. The Reeve assumes you've paid your dues. The Crown assumes the village can send more grain or bodies if needed. You assume none of them have ever spent a night on a straw mat surrounded by chickens. But behind all this exists the real economy, the invisible one. The barter deals the favors, the silent agreements that keep people alive when the taxes take too much. Today, your neighbor gives you a worn-out cloak in exchange for half a sack of carrots. You patch it and wear it proudly. Tomorrow, you'll help him build a shed for his sheep. No coins change hands. No steward knows. It's not rebellion, it's reality. Sometimes the traveling peddlers arrive. They're like shooting stars, rare, bright, and occasionally full of lies. They carry combs, pots, ribbons, pins, herbs, and stories. They'll trade for eggs cloth, even a decent set of teeth. You're not sure if that's a joke. Their goods are odd, overpriced, occasionally broken, but they aren't from here. And that makes them magic. One time, a tinker swapped a cracked mirror for a chicken. The whole village took turns peering into it. You stared at your own face longer than you meant to. The lines, the grime, the eyes that looked both older and younger than you remembered. You haven't seen a reflection since. Other traders bring rumors. There's talk of a distant war. Again. Something about a duke's cousin marrying the wrong person, or maybe invading the wrong city, or insulting the wrong hat. The reason doesn't matter. What matters is that lords need soldiers and soldiers come from villages like yours. You've seen it happen. A royal messenger arrives. Scrolls are read. A few able-bodied men are summoned. There's ceremony, maybe a speech. Then silence. Those men rarely come back. You'd like to believe you're safe, too old, too necessary, too invisible. But you keep your boots in good shape just in case. Sometimes you dream of running, of packing a bag and walking until the manor disappears behind you. Of reaching a town where no one knows your name and you can sell your skills without someone taking a third of everything you earn. You know the stories. If a serf escapes and lives in a city for a year and a day without being claimed, they become free. It sounds like a myth. A beautiful, dangerous myth. Historians still argue whether that rule was widely enforced or just theoretical. In your case, you wouldn't last a month without the land. It's not freedom if it comes with starvation. And then there are the uprisings. Whispers passed from traveler to traveler. A village where the serfs refused to pay taxes. A manor house burned to the ground. A lord run off into the woods by angry plowmen. These stories always end the same way. Soldiers arrive, punishments follow, and the fields turn red. Still, you keep listening. Hope, after all, doesn't have to be reasonable. Today, the census men ride on. The scrolls are packed, the names recorded. Your friend returns pale and quiet. He won't say what they asked. You don't press. You return to your tools. The cabbage won't plant itself and the sun isn't getting any higher. Later that evening, a neighbor brings over a small bag of dried fruit in exchange for your help fixing a fence. You sit by the fire eating something sweet for the first time in months and talking about the census like it was weather. Maybe they'll forget us next time your spouse says. You nod, maybe, but you both know better. The world beyond your village is growing bigger. The lords are growing richer. The officials are growing bolder. And yet, here you are, with mud on your boots, bread in your belly, and a tiny seed of defiance tucked somewhere behind your ribs. Because maybe, just maybe, being unfree isn't the same as being powerless. You awake with a pounding in your ears, not from illness or hangover, but from the bell. That cursed manor bell always rung too early and too often by someone who clearly thinks sleep is a sin. You groan, swing your legs over the side of the bed, and feel your toes land in a puddle. Another leak. Wonderful. As you wring out your blanket and curse the thatch, you can already hear the footsteps gathering. Today's not just another day in the fields. Today is inspection day. Every so often, the manor holds what can only be described as a pageant of feudal paranoia. The Lord wants to make sure his land is well tended, which means his stewards and reeves descend like geese on a harvest, checking fences, counting livestock, poking at fences, sniffing bread, and asking invasive questions about everything from your cabbages to your character. You dress quickly your cleanest tunic, meaning the one that smells less like smoke and more like hay, and step outside. The air is thick with anticipation and manure. There's a knot of villagers gathering near the edge of the green where the steward waits flanked by two scribes and a horse that looks far too smug. You spot your name on the list. Of course, everyone's name is on the list. Your first stop is the fields. The steward wants to see your crops. He inspects the rows of beans and barley, notes the weeding quality, and gives a grunt of approval that could also mean indigestion. One scribe scratches something into a roll of parchment with alarming energy. You're asked about your tools, your seed stores, your grain yields. You mumble your answers politely and pray they don't remember that time last year when a goat ate half your wheat sacks before you could trade them. Then comes the house inspection. You lead them to your hut, inwardly cringing. It's tidy enough by your standards, but you know the steward's looking for faults. He taps the walls, lifts the cooking pot lid, empty glances at the thatch with a frown, and pokes your mattress for reasons you don't want to know. Your piglet snorts and tries to chew the steward's boot. You silently will him to succeed. You've let your roof sag, he says, as though it's a lifestyle choice. It's been a hard winter, you reply. He grunts again. You try to smile. Inspections are about more than upkeep. They're about control. A reminder that your life is subject to scrutiny, that you may live in a hut the size of a bread oven, but the Lord still wants to know if your floorboards creak and whether your chickens are laying. It's frustrating, humiliating, even absurd, but you endure it because you must. After the house, you're led to the storage sheds. You open your barley barrel low but acceptable. You display your drying herbs. You even show the patch of linen you've been weaving for the past month, hoping it will count as industriousness. Then comes the questioning. Have you attended Mass weekly? Yes, paid your tithes, of course. Have you missed any days of week work? Not since the fever. Have you taken wood from the Lord's forest? Only fallen branches. Have you seen anyone else take wood from the forest? You hesitate. No. The steward narrows his eyes. The scribe stops writing for a moment. Then he resumes. You know this dance. Everyone does. Honesty can be dangerous. So can silence. You learn to walk the tightrope between fealty and self-preservation. Eventually, the steward moves on to the next house. You exhale so sharply your spouse mistakes it for a sneeze. You spend the rest of the day doing small tasks, mending a fence, hauling water, whispering to your neighbor about whether the steward's horse had a limp. Anything to distract from the tension still coiling in your spine. At twilight, a crier walks through the village announcing fines and warnings. A few are named. One woman is fined a hen for failing to repair her fence. A man is ordered to pay 3 pence for underreporting his barley. Someone else receives praise for producing extra milk. Everyone claps politely, no one smiles. Historians still debate whether inspections were designed to improve productivity or just reinforce hierarchy. You don't see much of a difference. Either way, they remind you who holds the quill and who holds the hoe. That night, you sit by the hearth staring into the flames. Your youngest child asked why the steward smells like cabbage. You shush them, laughing silently. You answer with a story about a steward who got lost in a pig pen and couldn't find his way out for 3 days. It's not true, but it should be. Your spouse brings out a bit of cheese saved from a barter 2 weeks ago. You cut it into slivers and hand out pieces like relics. The children squeal in delight. For a moment, the inspection is forgotten. You realize that your home, though humble, is full of love and laughter and occasional pig-related chaos. The steward might inspect your roof and your field and your floor, but he cannot measure this. He cannot tax your joy. And as you lay down to sleep, the scent of wood smoke in your hair and warmth in your chest, you whisper a small, defiant thought. Let them come again. You'll still be here. Still growing. Still laughing. Still free in the ways that matter. You awake to the distant rumble of voices and pounding feet. Not the comforting clatter of children at play, but something more urgent. Something sharper. You peer out the window, a narrow gap patched with oiled parchment, and see a gathering crowd near the village square. The reeve is shouting orders. People are pushing and murmuring. A rebellion, no, not quite, but close. News has arrived. A nearby manor's serfs have refused to pay an extra tax demanded by their lord. Word is spreading fast like a flame catching dry straw. The peasants there have blocked roads, burned barns, and are threatening to march at the castle. It's the kind of news that makes your heart beat faster and your hands tremble, even as your mind says, keep your head down, work your fields, say your prayers. But the fire of rebellion flickers in the village too. Quietly, carefully, your neighbor, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, gathers a small group in hushed conversation near the well. They talk of justice, of rights, of breaking chains. You listen, torn between hope and fear. Rebellion is a dangerous game. You remember stories from your grandfather, stories of the peasants' revolt decades ago, when thousands of common folk marched on London demanding fairer taxes and freedoms. They were crushed, leaders executed, fields burned, lives destroyed. Historians still argue whether these revolts truly changed anything or simply hardened the walls between lord and serf. You think they changed something, if only the way people dared to dream. Your village has seen unrest before. The last time a group of young men tried to refuse extra labor during harvest, the reeve caught them and whipped 3 in front of the church. The others fled only to be caught and fined heavily. It was a lesson, but the whispers continued. Today you consider whether to join the talks or stay silent. The risks are clear. Punishment is brutal, but the burdens are growing heavier. Taxes have increased again. Labor demands multiply. The Lord's court grows more intrusive. People are starving. Children grow thin. Hope feels like a distant star, bright but far away. You decide to attend the meeting. Gathered in a barn near the edge of the village, a handful of men and women debate their options. Some urge patience, appeal to the steward, petition the Lord, pray for mercy. Others demand action, refuse taxes, strike, fight. The room buzzes with tension. You hear plans whispered and warnings shouted. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down chains forged in laws and land in fear. One voice rises above the rest. It's your neighbor. sharp, clear, and full of fire. He speaks of unity of strength and numbers of a future where serfs might own their own fields, marry freely, and keep the fruits of their labor. You nod. Part of you believes, but another part remembers the last rebellion, the blood, the ashes, the cold nights spent hiding in woods hunted like beasts. The meeting breaks with no decision, only uncertainty. Some will wait, some will act. You return home with your thoughts tangled like weeds. That night you dream of freedom, not the freedom to flee, but the freedom to stay. To live without fear of a whip or fine. To see your children grow without the shadow of hunger or punishment. In the quiet hours before dawn, you whisper a prayer for courage, not just for yourself, but for all those who dare to hope. Because rebellion isn't just about swords or shouts, it's about refusing to be invisible. And sometimes that's the fiercest act of all. The morning mist clings to your village like a damp cloak, softening the edges of the thatched roofs and turning the fields into a shimmering sea of green and brown. You step outside the chill, biting at your fingers and breathe in the scent of damp earth and fresh beginnings. Today is market day. Well, not quite a market, more a gathering of traders, peddlers, and villagers from miles around hawking wares, swapping stories and trading goods. It's one of the few chances you get to see the wider world beyond your manor, and you cherish it. You trudge along the muddy path to the meeting spot, a clearing by the old oak tree where wagons creak and dogs bark, and the air buzzes with the hum of barter. There's the tinker again with his battered pots and strange tools. You eye a small knife with a wooden handle perfect for carving. You'd need to trade something for it, maybe a handful of eggs or a woven basket. The herbalist has arrived too, her satchel heavy with dried roots leaves and mysterious powders. You exchange a nod. She's your best hope for soothing coughs and aches this side of the river. Nearby, a minstrel strums a lute, singing ballads about distant lands, heroic deeds, and loves lost to war. The tune is haunting the words foreign, but it stirs something deep in your chest, a longing for stories beyond furrows and fences. You watch a man from the city, his clothes finer than most nobles, bartering for a sack of grain. His accent is sharp, unfamiliar. He carries a coin pouch that jingles like a small bell. Coins are rare in your village. To you, they sound like magic. Children dart between the stalls, cheeks flushed with excitement. Your own join the chase, their laughter weaving through the chatter like sunlight. You trade a handful of dried beans for a length of linen. It's scratchy and pale, but better than patched wool for keeping the chill at bay. You tuck it carefully into your cloak. As the day stretches, you hear rumors carried on the wind. A knight has passed through a nearby town recruiting men for a distant campaign. The talk is of honor, glory, and gold. You scoff. You know that most recruited peasants never see gold, only mud, blood, and cold nights. There's also talk of a plague sweeping through a city far to the south. It's called the Black Death. No one knows exactly what it is, only that it kills quickly and cruelly. People whisper prayers, avoid strangers, and hide their faces behind scarves. You feel a shiver and pull your cloak tighter. Markets are a place of exchange, not just goods, but news, fears, and hopes. You buy a small wooden whistle for your youngest, a rare treat. They blow it happily, the sharp note slicing through the din like a sudden laugh. You smile, savoring the moment. As dusk falls, traders pack up wagons, groan, and the village begins to empty. You walk home slowly, the linen warm against your skin, the whistle tucked safely in your pocket. Back at the hut, the fire flickers and sputters. Your spouse is mending clothes by its glow. The children chase shadows on the wall. You sit tired but content. For a few hours, the wider world touched your village. And maybe it will touch your life. Historians still debate how often medieval serfs actually traveled beyond their villages. Some say very rarely. Others argue markets like these were vital lifelines opening small windows to new ideas and goods. The truth travel is hard, dangerous, and expensive. But stories travel faster than you can walk. And in those stories lies a kind of freedom. You wake to the distant sounds of barking dogs and shouting voices and unusual commotion that ripples through the village like a sudden gust of wind. Curiosity pries you from the warmth of your bed and you step outside to see what the fuss is about. A traveling juggler and his troupe have arrived. Not a common sight here, these entertainers bring color noise and a hint of chaos to the dull rhythm of surf life. The troupe is small, a juggler with nimble fingers and bright eyes, a musician with a strange-looking instrument, and a woman who performs acrobatic feats that make your neck ache just watching. Children swarm around them, eyes wide with wonder. You see your own little ones tugging at your cloak, begging to stay and watch. You relent. The juggler tosses balls of wood and cloth into the air, catching them with a flourish that seems almost magical. The musician plays a tune both lively and mournful, the notes carrying tales of far-off lands where people speak different tongues and eat strange foods. You listen mesmerized. Later, the troupe performs a short play, a story of a foolish king, a clever servant, and a dragon, made from nothing but painted canvas and imagination. Laughter bubbles up from the crowd, a rare and precious sound. For a moment you forget the weight of the manor, the endless labor, the hunger, and the taxes. You share a crust of bread with your neighbor, whispering about the strange wonders you've just witnessed. The troupe's leader, the juggler, catches your eye and offers a wink. You smile back. Travelers like these are both a blessing and a curiosity. They bring news from beyond the village borders, tales of wars, plagues, festivals, and strange customs. They sell trinket spices and sometimes forbidden books. They risk much to bring their art to places like yours. Historians still debate how often medieval serfs had access to such performances. Some argue they were rare elite indulgences. Others claim they were vital parts of rural culture offering respite and connection. You believe the latter. As dusk falls, the troupe packs their belongings and prepares to move on. Children beg for keepsakes, buttons, feathers, scraps of cloth. You give your youngest child a small wooden ball, the juggler tossed carelessly during the show. It's a treasure. You watch the performers disappear down the road, their laughter and music fading into the evening mist. Back at the hut, the fire crackles. Your family gathers close eyes bright with stories and wonder. For one day the world feels a little bigger, a little more magical, and just a little more hopeful. The seasons continue their relentless march, and with them comes change, slow, uneven, and often barely noticeable. But if you pay attention, if you listen to the whispers in the fields and the shifting winds in the trees, you realize that serfdom itself is beginning to shift. You hear it in the village chatter, in the cautious smiles of neighbors, in the hesitations of the reeve. The old ways, the unyielding chains of labor, the rigid taxes, the iron grip of the manor are starting to loosen. Not everywhere, not for everyone, but here and there, like wildflowers breaking through cracked stone, freedom is stirring. The plague, the wars, the famines, they have all changed the balance. The lords find themselves with fewer hands to work the fields, fewer mouths to feed. Labor becomes scarce, and with scarcity comes bargaining power. Your neighbor whispers that some villages have begun to negotiate wages instead of labor. That some serfs have bought their freedom outright. That the blacksmith down the road is no longer bound to his lord, but works for coin from anyone who pays. It sounds like a dream. You wonder if it's true. You watch your children grow, their futures uncertain, but tinged with possibility. The eldest talks of apprenticing in a town beyond the hills, of learning trades that don't involve plowing or hauling. Change is in the air, but it's slow, like the first warm breath of spring after a harsh winter. You know that serfdom won't end overnight, that the old laws, the old powers will fight tooth and nail to keep their grip. but you also know that nothing lasts forever. Historians still argue about when and how serfdom truly faded, whether it was the plague, the rising towns, or the persistent efforts of serfs themselves. You don't care for their debates. You care about the feel of the soil, the laughter of your children, the hope you cradle in your heart. One day, maybe the land will be yours in a way it's never been before. Tonight, you lie down with that thought, a small flame in the dark. You close your eyes, wrapped in the worn but comforting folds of your patched cloak, and dream not just of freedom, but of a future where freedom is shared. And as sleep carries you away, you smile. Because for all the toil, the hardship, the endless struggle, you're part of a story much bigger than yourself. A story of resilience, of change, of hope. And that is something no Lord can ever take away. Your breath forms a mist as you step outside into the cool morning air. The village lies quiet, wrapped in the soft light of dawn. You take a deep breath, savoring the crispness before the day begins. You look down at your hands, calloused, weathered, marked by years of toil and care. These hands have sown seeds, built fences, held children, and faced hardships that no story fully captures. Today could be any day. A day of work, of labor, of struggle. But it could also be the last day in this life. Life is fragile here. You know that. You think about what comes after. If you die today, what would remain? A crooked fence mended one last time. A patch of earth tilled with love. A handful of memories held by neighbors and kin. A story told around fires to children who will grow and dream. You hope for a simple wooden cross, rough but honest. A prayer whispered softly by a passing priest. The warmth of remembered hands. You hope your life mattered. Not in grand ways, but in the small, quiet moments that make a village home. The seasons will turn. The fields will grow green again. Children will chase one another, laugh, and argue over ribbons and stones. You will be part of the earth, the wind, the soil. Your story woven into the tapestry of countless lives, unseen but essential. As you stand in the morning light, a gentle peace settles over you. The work is hard, the days are long, the future uncertain. But you have lived, you have loved, you have endured. And that perhaps is the greatest story of all. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.